ones that I have to buy, I don't necessarily get all of.
Yeah.
Because I spend $1 grand just getting ribbons.
All right. You guys are live. I will come back up toward the end. Have fun, learn lots, and enjoy.
We have 2 more coming if they make it.
Oh, and I'm gonna throw up, for those of you who are interested, I'll put 2 of these flyers up here to get at the end. You can either scan them, because they will take you to all of the rest of the writer's track that we have this weekend. Or if you are an old school person and you want the physical copy, feel free to just grab that as well.
Jerry, how do we get me changed from Gary 999 to Bill Fawcett and everything?
Are you on your TTE or like
Yeah.
Josh left me the
I'll walk you through that in email. So I'll send you some directions on that. So
That would be good because I'm finding some of these site stuff opaque.
it has to do with however you just initially set up your tabletop events account.
How I don't have a tabletop events account. I said, yes, Lou, I'll come. We'll be there. What do you
I
want
did
us
set
to
up
do?
a tabletop account,
Yeah, I
he
was
did
gonna
not, but they scheduled him, so they made him an account.
Yes.
That would be,
Under
they
Gary
set it up that way. So did they give you the sign into that account? I will talk to Josh and see if we can get that
Well,
sent over to you.
Actually, we're gonna see Josh after this because they also didn't give us any schedules.
Josh is actually, he can hook you up.
Josh is the man. So
Josh is the man.
He's got
He
the
is
big board
absolutely-
back there.
Yeah, so he
We'll
can,
get it then.
He
He makes
can
the
hook you
magic happen,
he
that's
does,
for sure.
he does.
Good.
We'll get that.
And so, enjoy. I don't wanna take up more of your time. You guys have a great
Thanks.
session.
Couple, 2, 3 people missing still. Are we supposed to, when are we supposed to start?
It's
It
time.
started.
We can either give them
Well,
a
someone's
minute.
coming back after he gets rid of the donut, I think he was.
Oh, no, he's going to a different thing.
Oh, okay. So we're 4 people short, I guess. We're 4
And
people.
Well,
my
we
mom
have-
has to take my brothers to a different game, so she's not.
It's not gonna be accurate since
No,
I
it's not
just joined.
Not going to be accurate at all, but
Nope.
so there should be 12 people, and we have only 6. That's
Actually,
okay.
it's probably
That
about
means that you get to
correct.
ask
A lot of
twice.
people ditch these.
People are ditching everything.
But as long as you still outnumber us, we're good.
Yes.
Okay, this is the writer's track, short stories and novels, differences and process.
Whatever that means.
Well, we'll figure it out.
How about all about writing short stories, all about writing novels, and any questions you want to ask, and we'll give you some insider hints.
And a little insight as to the difference between the two and other stuff.
Jody Nye is a Times Best-Selling author, 56 books, something like
Yeah,
that.
about 56.
She's also the chief judge for the Writers of the Future contest. She
So
looks
your
at thousands
story-
of stories, hundreds of stories, dozens of stories a year. And
Bill Fawcett is
wait, let me throw the big one out. And way back when she was, what, 19?
19.
19 years old, her first writing assignment was taking Gary's handwritten notes and doing the DMG Monster Manual and Player's Handbook.
Ah, interesting.
That's the first thing she
I
ever
am
wrote.
not responsible for the tables.
No,
I am not.
no, that was Frank Mensa. My name's Bill Fawcett. I'm her husband, so I'm just here as a
Okay.
All right, I've been in the publishing business for almost 50 years. I'm a book packager. I have edited, put together, and created the ideas for over 500-600 novels by various authors. I've worked with almost every company.
And nonfiction books and guides and various things like
Yeah,
that.
I've got 25 books out there too, about half nonfiction. But she has about 150 short stories. I have about 20.
No, I have 200. I
200
did the
now?
count, yes, I did the count the other day.
Oh my God.
Mhm.
Anyhow, she's written. And I've got about 20 because I'm lazy. And her last book just came out in April from Bain. And I worked with a smaller publisher for one
Chris Kennedy.
with Chris Kennedy a while ago, last
Yep.
April too. No, you came out in June, I came out in April. Anyhow, so we've been knocking around and editing stuff for.
Involved with the game industry.
And the book industry.
Bill did how many articles for Dragon Magazine?
Oh yeah, I wrote for the first 45 Dragons. I helped start it. And then I left and created Mayfair Games with some other people and ran the Roll Aids line for a while. So we've been
Some of them will
knocking
be in the
around this.
auction.
Well, yeah, I did 9. I did 2 through 9. I was the auctioneer at Gen Con.
I accidentally became a Mayfair Games World AIDS collector. I didn't know I was going to. I actually have a good collection of them.
Oh, well, if you want Tower of Magic or anything signed, let me know.
I will have to think about that. We'll bring it next Gary Con.
We may not be at next Gary Con, we'll see. It conflicts with one of our other activities. I'm one of the senior directors of Dragon Con. And we have an event this weekend, and I can't miss it a third year in a row or they'll beat me up.
Yeah, they sure will.
It's,
So you have to vary between here
it's-
and there.
it's volunteer appreciation day. We rent a Dave and Buster's for the whole day. And we have 2,400 volunteers. So anyhow, but if you send me anything with return postage, I will personalize and sign it for you.
Anywho, one of the other things I do is I run the writer's workshop at Dragon Con, where people send me either an entire short story or up to 2,000 to 7,000 words of a novel plus the synopsis. And we talk about them, we analyze them, and
Her brother's having a issue.
Good luck.
hey, good luck.
They're going home.
No, we're not going home.
Oh,
Oh.
you can get a more comfy chair now.
Yep.
No, we're good.
You actually don't have to perch on a stool.
No, I'm okay with it. I like
All
it.
right, it's your butt.
Well, I'm going to then because we're a small group and I don't have to not have
There you go.
him behind my line of sight.
There you go.
Okay, she will do most of this because she runs the writer's workshop that you pay hundreds of dollars for at Dragon Con too.
That's right, and I'm doing this here for
Love of Luke,
a bottle top and a hug from Luke. So
whom she used to babysit for.
I met him when he was 7 years old and already shellacking people in tournaments. So he's always had great analytical mind, and
They major in the Marines.
that's right. So
So, all right,
Anyway.
short stories.
the main difference between a novel and a short story, besides the length, is its focus. A short story has one problem or one aim, one goal that it needs to accomplish or fail to accomplish. That's one of the things about literature is your protagonist will succeed or fail at their aim. And that's okay, because some stories don't end well. Some stories end in a way that the character did not expect at the beginning, but nevertheless is a satisfying ending, because your aim is to satisfy your reader, to make them happy, to make them glad that they read your story, whether or not it's a tragedy, whether or not it's a comedy, whether or not it's a dramatic story, science fiction, fantasy, westerns, you name it. But you only have time, because a short story is a very, very small piece of real estate, for one story arc and one only. If you get off the track, you will not have room to complete more than one. And the purpose of a short story is to tell that one idea, just get that one idea across. When you have a novel, you can get more complex. You can work in alternate timelines, many subsidiary storylines, but everything needs to tie together at the end. So in looking at them from a great distance, they all have a story arc with the energy that begins here, builds, and then closes out with nothing left hanging at the end. We have something that we call the resolution, or in film, the denouement, which, if it doesn't sound pretentious enough for you, just wait, we'll get there. Where you leave it open for a sequel novel or carry on with the storyline, whichever characters are still alive. And you leave that available, but the energy contained within the story arc of either a short story or a novel must be complete. You need to fulfill the promise you made on page 1 to your reader that you're going to tell them a story about this, and whether or not this ends with the same thing that it started out with, it still has a connection to it. It fulfills that promise. It gets the character to a point that is a satisfying ending for the reader. Whether or not it's a satisfying ending for the character is another complete idea. So when you are building that, you have to keep in mind that you must complete the short story. The Writers of the Future contest gets many, 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 many stories every quarter. And we're just about coming up to the end of the second quarter of the year, believe it or not. First quarter ends on December 31st. And then March 31st, June 30th, September 30th is actually the end of the fourth quarter because the book needs to be put together, the anthology, by the end of the year. That's why it's off. So many times I get stories that are a piece out of the middle of somebody else's epic, or it doesn't really end. And yes,
Okay, flaws we see, things that people do wrong. First of all, story arc means there should be a change in the person, in the environment, in something that is the result of what happens in the story. If there is no change in your story, it's a vignette, it's not a story. It's just a look at something. So it can be in the character's attitude. It can be on how many fingers they have. It doesn't matter. That's not a good ending. Nonetheless, but if you're writing a short story or a novel to another degree, a story arc must mean there is a change that occurs in it, even if it's just in the person's attitude. In fact, often it's just in the person's attitude, and it tells you how the person got to be that person. So not doing that is writing a vignette, and she gets a lot of those.
if there's no beginning, middle, and ending, then it's not a story.
And
As you said, it's a vignette.
and there's no change in it. And another thing is the kitchen sink approach. I've got another good idea. I'll just throw a reference to it into my story and not do anything. And that's doom, because it's unsatisfying for the reader, and it means that you aren't really writing a short story. You're just putting something with all your ideas in it down, even if it has a story arc. So try to limit only relevant things. Do you want to talk about how much you put into a short story as far as content versus a novel description?
Well, I do almost the same amount of world building for a short story as I do for a novel. In fact, I have had short stories blossom and become a series. But
We're losing them. Left and right.
Another one.
My husband is Holland.
That's okay. I'll have a better question and answer session.
That's fine, whatever. Jody?
okay, I'm
You have room in a novel for more characters, more subplots, for something other than the main idea. If you lose focus on the main idea in a short story, you've lost the story, basically. And so that's what defines a short story versus a novel, is what she said.
No,
And
everything still has to tie together in some way at the end.
it has an ending.
If you are writing a series of books or a series of short stories, yeah, it looks like this.
Mhm.
Because the epic needs to conclude at the end. When you have an open-ended epic, that's difficult. Or whether you at the beginning thought you were going to end the epic at book 5 and your publisher said, well, we could really stretch this to 2 more books, maybe 5 more, I don't know, 7 sounds good. We all know what we're talking about here.
So if I can jump in and just ask the question
Yes.
on that.
At any
Sure.
time.
So when I had this idea for the grand epic, I made a firm decision to write the entire epic.
Good.
Of 4 books. Is that now I start reading people say, oh no, you just write the first section and then. So for
Well,
me,
right.
I had to do the whole thing.
Good, I'm glad you did.
Okay.
That means that you know how it begins, how it ends, and that it will have the same energy instead of somebody who, like me, writes a few of the books and then for whatever reason there's a gap. It never quite feels the same.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that you are doing it, it has a continuity, which is incredibly important. Continuity as a writer is your God. For example, if you're writing a spell on page 32 needs to work the same way on page 326, or you have to have a good reason for that. The same goes for style and for voice. People are looking for consistency in how the story is being told because they're enjoying the story the way it was being told in book 1, and book 4 should feel the same way. Some people are good at this, some people are not. But also, writers, as well as their characters, mature as they write.
I've already had that realization.
Yeah. The book that you finish is not the one you started, which is why you should always go back and rewrite the beginning.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
By the time I'm done with the third here, the first is, oh my God, who the heck wrote that?
Yeah, you
So
should,
You're
back we
learning.
went.
you
Back
should
we
read
went.
things you
Every
write 40
word you
years
write.
later.
Every word you write, you're learning. And I had David Gerald come in to talk to my class at DragonCon one year, and he said the first 1,000,000 words don't count.
Mhm.
No matter what. I mean, they all get rejected. Nobody looks at them. That's fine. It's the 1,000,000 words. It doesn't count. It's after that you should have learned enough about your craft that you spot the mistakes before you send them to an editor. That you say, oh God, what did I really do that again? Or I did not close off that storyline. I did not pick up that last bit of the tale.
Oh, yeah, he didn't die, or did he? We don't know.
Or a character who dies more than once, which has also happened in books.
You know, or a kid who's 4 years old in one book and 9 years old a year later.
Yeah, right.
Oh yeah, that happens too. Keep track of
It's
your
the best of
timeline.
writers. That was Anne McCaffrey.
She got away with it apparently.
Okay, on a submission and business level, finishing a novel is good. No one's going to buy an unknown writer's novel that isn't finished. You get by with one in description if the one is strong. If you have 4 and they can read them and they're all strong, that's better because publishers, especially small and medium presses, like 3 or 4 books in a row for a number of reasons, including that they can put them on Kindle Unlimited and things like that. And similar, and so if you're when you're submitting your first novel, you're sending proof of ability. This is from a writer who can write a novel. When an editor looks at a novel the first time, they open it. They read the beginning. If the first paragraph catches them, they'll read the first chapter. The first chapter catches them, they'll read the first 3. They'll always stop. They'll go to somewhere in the middle and see if it's sustained. And then they'll read the last chapters to see if it has an ending or not. And if you pass those tests, then they will submit it to somebody that's an assistant editor, read the whole book and give me a summary and see if it's worth looking at or not. That's how books are analyzed that go to a publisher, especially a legacy publisher.
However, that means that you're sending it to someone who has read thousands of books, and they can tell within a page or 2 whether or not it's worth their going on. So you need to catch them early. You need to make sure that your narrative book interests the reader as they are expert readers. And if they say, oh God, this is a cliche, or oh God, this person can't write prose, or yeah, they're rewriting Game of Thrones, and we've already had it with George Martin not finishing the real Game of Thrones, so why do I want to deal with this? Interest them right away. One of our friends who was an editor at Ace Books and then went on to, God help us, Harlequin, said she gave it the 2-page test. So really, if you cannot hook the reader in 2 pages, she was ready to throw it over her shoulder. If you pass the 2-page test, you'd go on to do what Bill said, read 20 pages scattered throughout the book to make sure that the style was consistent and that it was something worth reading. And then when it goes to a second reader, who's usually used to be an assistant or associate editor who was on maternity leave and had nothing to do except change diapers and read manuscripts for $25 or $50 a crack, and their expert report is what made it possible for it to go on to back to the editor to read and champion it in the marketing meeting. You want to describe that?
All right, how your book is treated if you send it. Let's say you've done a few indie and you send one to Bing, or not Bing. Let's send one to Del Rey, or Daw, or one of them, who's now owned by the Chinese. Your book comes in. It passes all these queries, and the editor decides, yes, we should probably buy this book. It will be a good seller. We're going to make money on it from the beginning. The legacy's changed. And they're not investing in you anymore. They need to make a profit on every book. All right. That book is then taken to a meeting of 10 to 12 people with people from marketing, administration, accounting, sales, and an editor. One editor. One person who actually knows anything about the book and has probably read more than 4 books in their life is attending that meeting. I know none of the sales force is literate. They barely can read the covers. So they will be your champion at that meeting. And if they can convince the meeting, they do what's called a P&L, a profit and loss. We will make money on this book. Here's how. It's similar to this book. This book did this. What will cost us this much to pay the author, this much to print, etc. The meeting then votes, and they need a near unanimous vote, and then they say yes, and they often do, because otherwise there wouldn't be any books.
Right.
They will make you a contract offer. You're now at the first point when you could actually talk to an agent if you wanted to. Until you have a contract offer from a major publisher with, at least several $1,000s involved, no agent's going to want to talk to you because they can't make any money on you. And odds are they may never, until you crack a market or in a position or sell so many indie books that they can convince a publisher they want you, which is people like Larry Correia did and many others. Where, selling 100,000 indie books, ooh, Bain wants that Monster Hunter series for us. So at that point, they'll give you a contract. You don't have a lot of leverage on the contract. Some contracts you have to look at, like Simon & Schuster's or Ballantyne's, and lately Tor's, because they changed contracts to the Macmillan Standard. And you can get advice, you can get an error. How do you get an agent? Take a writer someone you've met at cons and are friendly with, and say, who's your agent? Would they be interested in a new writer? I've got an offer from X publisher. And if they can refer you to the agent, you'll get their attention. Some agents simply aren't taking new clients, but if they're not, they'll probably tell you who is that they respect. And
Anyhow,
word of mouth is how that works.
But we're talking about how to write a short story versus how to write a novel. When you have an idea for a short story, and it is that one idea that strikes you, you start thinking about how to tell that story. You need to settle on a tone of voice. You need to find your protagonist. You need to find a setting. And one of the things you should not take into account is what is popular right now. Write the story that you think you need to tell. Write it to the length that you think it should be. And it's probably too long, but get it all out. Get it all out on the page from beginning, middle, and ending. Go back and look it over. I advise you, if you are a new writer, not to edit as you write. A few of us do, but we're used to being able to get back into the swing of things. Some people can't. They completely derail. Don't do that to yourself.
And not on short stories.
Yeah. With the novel, C.J. Cherry always recommended stopping before the end of a chapter. Don't add a chapter the night. Let yourself think about it overnight. Your subconscious is going to be busily making words, and start fresh by rereading the last few pages and then plunging forward, finish that chapter, start the next one. But don't stop at a natural stopping point, because you'll lose that energy.
When CJ was teaching me to write, she always said, never finish a fight scene. Sleep on a fight scene, sleep on a romance scene, never finish a key scene. Then go back the next day, and I have a hard time getting back into my books. Jody pops right in. Her mind's very facile. I'm more of a fossil, so I move like rock. And what she advised me is take everything you wrote the next day and do your cleanup. Read it and clean it up. Mm-hmm. And then just by the time you finish rewriting it and cleaning it up, you'll be writing. Yeah. Because you're back into your character and into your voice.
Yeah, that's what I had to do that.
You had a question?
As we're kind of transitioning from the business piece to the creative piece of it. So you've got your short story, you've finished it, you've taken a scalpel to it.
Yes.
And you've kind of written the length. Is there, from a business perspective, is there a sweet spot page-wise, if you're looking to get published in like an anthology or something?
The first thing you need to do is see what the editor wants.
Okay.
If they say 5,000 to 7,000 words, they mean 5,000 to 7,000 words.
Right.
For them, anything less than 5,000 words is probably not going to be developed enough for them, or they simply want a consistent size of story. 7,000 words, anything above that is going to be stealing from the editor's stipend. They get only so much money in order to pay for the stories. And Kevin Anderson has an incredible story about a Star Wars anthology that he put together where somebody tripled the size of their story, and that meant that he had to pay for them out of his own pocket. And he was very, very angry about that.
But he was an author, he couldn't.
Because it was a terrible story.
Yes, but it was a big name author.
So
In any case, he had already promised it. It also changed the size of the book.
The publisher wasn't happy, they have limits. If you're looking at putting it into a magazine, an electronic magazine, that's less of a concern.
Right.
If, for example, you want to send something to Beneath Ceaseless Skies, which is an online-only magazine, sky's the limit. But anything that is published both in print and online, stick to the guidelines. If you're doing it for a short story, they will always tell you what the parameters are. If you want to write something for your own amusement, doesn't matter.
That's different, yeah.
So
Absolutely.
So I'm going to be specific. So the Bain has a short story competition.
Yes,
8,000 words.
right.
So my story is done and it's at 5,500 words. So now give me some advice.
No,
You're
that,
fine.
that
That's
should be
good.
fine.
That's good.
You're
Don't
fine.
go over 8.
Don't go over it.
That's a cap.
But
That's,
the
That's
story is told.
Yes.
that's
So
like,
I don't want to make it longer.
then you
Fine.
shouldn't.
Fine.
One of the winners was 3,000 words.
Yeah.
It's
Okay.
a little short.
This, it does not matter as long as it is good and as long as it falls into all of the other guidelines. The Writers of the Future contest just concluded its first quarter. And of the short stories that I chose for the finalists that go to the rest of the judges to pick out who the winners were for that quarter, one of them was 13,000 words. The rest were all in the middle. And one of them was a flash story, 750 words. It was really good. And it did everything it needed to in 750 words.
Nice.
5,500 words is just fine.
Yes. You know, since high school, I've never read a short story on purpose.
Oh.
They're not my thing. You know, I like the big story. But in the process of in writing multiple books, and I just felt I needed to do something to perfect my world building and to not get wordy. And I thought short stories, I should think about it. And now I've done it and I'm kind of like totally fascinated by it because it was a wonderful experience in writing it. So you know, I'm really curious about what you learn in writing a short story, maybe how that affects how your novel and back and forth, maybe what you could say.
Focus is one thing.
Okay.
It teaches you a lot about concise writing because you have so little real estate to deal with. You have to tell one story in a certain number of words and no more. When you're writing a novel, East Books likes 90,000 word novels. They really don't go beyond that because they want to pay for a book that's that big and no bigger. Bain doesn't care, you get doorstops. Del Rey used to be like that. And certain stories lend themselves to being larger and longer, but that's okay. The nice thing about writing a short story is, especially when you're writing a novel, is you can actually finish a short story. My general framework for writing a short story is it takes about 3 days. I have written short stories in a day. I've had stories that sort of said, well, you know, I'm not finished yet, so you're just gonna have to deal. You have more thinking to do about it. Roger Zelazny put himself to writing a short story a day for a while. It can be done. That's something else that the Writers of the Future do, is that the winners come to Hollywood, in fact, in 3 weeks. They will be in Hollywood with me. And during the seminar, they will have to write a story in 24 hours. They get from 2 o'clock on Monday to 2 o'clock on Tuesday, and they need to be finished. And they always do. And some of them are really, really good, and about 35% of them go on to sell those stories. later on, because focus, especially with a very sharp time limit, makes you think hard, makes your brain turn on. And sometimes they're really short, but I've had 2 in the last 2 years that were over 8,000 words that they wrote in 24 hours.
I could do that, but
Now-
not well.
Now,
You'd be surprised.
there's short stories related to a novel or a particular animal. Publishers love them because they put them out on their websites, like the Bain.com site or
Yeah.
on Tor's site or something, as teasers for the novel. So you want to write something that's not in the novel, that's about the novel, that will show the nature of the novel when you're doing a story. One of the best ways to do that is to take something that's referred to in the novel that isn't worth another book,
Right.
but reflects something significant about the nature of the novel, like a characterization or a combat or whatever, and just say, and after the firefight at da-da-da, we were in bad shape. Write your short story as a firefight and da-da-da. And then they put that up and everybody knows you did a military novel. And they can get a sample of it, and if they like it, they'll sell a few more books.
Or something you started to write for your novel and realized it didn't fit. It went off on a tangent that was not necessary to the novel plot or the structure. And you say, ooh, I really hate to waste this, put it aside, because it could be a useful character sketch or another short story or a bonus piece for your readers. If they start writing to you and saying, oh God, I really love this, but I wanted to know more about what happened to Karen when, well, it so happens.
Yeah. Nice.
And if you're really lucky, you can do the James Corey thing and collect them and sell them as entire book.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
The Robert Asprin Myth Adventures, which Bob wrote 12 books, the 2 of us wrote 5 and an anthology together. I'm continuing. And we decided we would do short stories about the characters and had an enormous amount of fun at it. Bob had done one by himself for whatever,
For one of my anthologies.
for one of Bill's anthologies.
Forever After.
And we got to doing that, and it was a lot of fun because it was the characters which everyone was familiar with, set in the worlds everybody liked, and just a little story, one story, instead of something complex that had a more impactful expression for the anthology, for the series as a whole. You have the opportunity to explain something about a character or to tie up a storyline that wasn't quite finished for some reason or another, or a side story. that
Wasn't worth
was referred to.
finishing.
Right.
In fact, that's a relevant fact about how much background and detail you put in a short story versus a novel.
Well, people do indulge themselves. When you're writing a novel, it looks like you have all the room in the world, but nothing should actually be outside of the realm of the plot. Everything should serve the plot in the end. So if you send your characters off on a holiday, there should be a purpose to that scene as far as the plot is concerned.
Yeah, if the characters have a diversion, if nobody dies, cut the diversion. That's a rule of thumb. And also the amount of background you show. In a novel, you can give some background and you can explain the universe. In a short story, generally, it's best to assume that everyone's familiar, including the reader, with the universe, and just write the short story with as few things to make it understandable as possible.
Write from the knowledge, don't write the knowledge. My first editor, Brian Thompson of Sacred Memory, said, don't air your education. No more than 10% of what you have thought up about your world should appear on the page. Should always just be writing from the knowledge of it. When you turn on a light switch, you don't explain how electricity works. You just go flick the lever, or flick the switch, and the lights come on, and that's all you need to do. There's a famous story about Star Trek, the original series. Someone wrote in the script a whole page of instructions for Captain Kirk to bark at the bridge crew, and somebody who had a lot more sense just crossed crossed it all out and wrote reverse course. And that was all that needed to be done. So, what next, my dear? Characterization?
Okay. You
I'll
can-
start.
You can start with characterization. I'm thinking more about if you're writing a novel, you also should not include not just background of the world, but I don't need to know the maid came from Jersey from a poor family and has worked there for 7 years unless she's going to kill somebody in the book. I mean, it's okay to have. Not all characters need to be deep. Only relevant characters need to be deep. The old rule in a short story is you never give a name to anybody who isn't important. The bartender, not Sid. And that lets the reader focus on the story and not the background, which will kill a short story. Which segues into what you do with characters in a short story versus novel.
Your protagonist is always, if maybe not on the surface, the right person to be the protagonist for the story. They are never completely equal to the task when they start out to do the task. They have a lot to learn, they have allies to gain, they have obstacles to overcome, but they are the right person to complete this task. So they will always have a flaw of some kind. Nobody is perfect. Perfect people are boring. Superman was not interesting until he had kryptonite and Lois Lane. He was just this guy. But until he had vulnerabilities, and your character must have vulnerabilities, because otherwise your audience can't really connect with them. And your main character is your reader's analog in the story. What if you were in this? So you need somebody that they can sympathize with, or not necessarily sympathize with, but you must have a hook to make sure that the reader is invested enough in their story to want to complete the journey with them.
To care what happens, either to the character or the things around the character. If you
Yeah.
run it from a villain perspective, you want to care that they're thwarted at the end, if nothing else. But it's important to you create a character that can be done. All stories, including those with aliens and everything else, are humans. We write
Yeah.
about ourselves
Well,
because
they're
we don't, they're people. We don't understand anything else. We can't think like a hoarder. We don't understand anyone else. We have to think of it as us. So whatever you're writing as an alien, even if you're not constrained by the outfits that you can afford to put in casting, like Star Trek was, only humanoid aliens. The Horta was an exception. You've got to create something that is either something that's cared about by the reader fairly early in the process, preferably the hook. And negatives are not a good hook. Don't start a short story with, after he strangled the cat and killed the puppies. It's not going to keep a reader reading. They're going to put it down going, yeah.
Give them a reason to continue. There is a book that had 2 sequels and a sort of side project called Save the Cat by Blake Snyder. Blake Snyder was a screenwriter, and he put together what he called his beat sheet, 15 points in a story that are expected portions of the story, like the introduction to it where you introduce the quest. The main character almost always refuses the quest at first and then takes it up. There are a whole lot of things like this. The important ones are the 3 acts, because that's the way we like to tell stories in the West. And the midpoint at which the character finds that what they wanted out of this adventure is not what they needed, which is what the second half of the story is about, and so on. These are very interesting books to look at as far as the underlying structure of it, because almost all movies follow this sort of storyline. There's a Japanese form of storytelling that I only learned about because we had one submitted to the contest, that one of my slushers said, this is an example of 6-syllable Japanese word. which means that it's a story that has an introduction and then a twist. And that's the whole story structure instead of the 3-act structure. If you are following one of those or the other, if you have a reader that appreciates the particular story structure, they'll get it. Otherwise, it's very easy to stick to the Western 3-act play. There's also Save the Cat Goes to the Movies and Save the Cat Strikes Back, which has more details. And in one of those, he expands his beat sheet to 22 because the ending has a very complex structure of how you finally dig down deep, create the parameters for the ending, and conclude your story, and so on. And then there's a lady called Jessica Brody who took Blake Snyder's work and wrote Save the Cat Writes a Novel. So you can get the idea of where these things fall in a storyline. And I think that it's tremendously interesting that almost all Western stories fall into this pattern. So it's tempting to use these as a plan, a template. Don't do that. You can use it as a guideline to say, what's missing? Something's missing. Maybe it's, oh yes, I didn't introduce the antagonist here, or they got all these magic powers and they never played with them. You know, what would we do if we suddenly found that we had magic? What would we do first? Depends on the character. It tells you a lot about your main character. In a short story, you have a lot less time, but the most important thing is to hook your reader. So we have a thing called the narrative hook, which can be done in very, very few words. I had a friend a writer named Anne Melrose, who started a short story with the words, "My brother is missing, but I have an alibi this time." And you were a very scary person. But it had everything in it that needed to have. It had a character, it had an action, it set you kind of in time and space, and it made you ask a question that could only be answered by going on to read the rest of the story. And that's a successful narrative hook. It can be done in incredibly few words. But with a short story, it should really not exceed 100 words or so.
The last man in the room
Yep.
sat in a chair. There was a knock at the door.
Last
That's
Man
a
in the
narrative
World.
hook.
In fact, that's the whole book, the whole story.
Yeah, well, that's the whole story. It was actually, there was an anthology done in the 60s with 7 or 8 name authors, among others Asimov and Dixon and some others. Each one used that as their first line and had a completely different story. Some had the Earth under siege and all the people, one had all the people had left Earth. Another one, he was the last man and all the women were still alive. Something had killed all the men and he was the last man alive. And it wasn't heaven. The point is, it's got to make the reader want to know what the next line says. Go to the end of the story. And it's probably the most important element in a short story. Because if you don't have, they didn't buy a book to read the whole book. They're reading short stories. And if they get a paragraph in and there's nothing, they'll go on. They'll just go right past it because they don't care.
With the novel, it's a little different. You can go longer. Conventional wisdom is 4 to 10 pages before the hook is set. You must have something at that point which drags the reader forward. Some people are better at it. Robin Hobb, Assassin's Apprentice, it takes the whole chapter, the whole first chapter, and the hook is set in the last line of the chapter. Don't go past that.
Stephen Bruce always does it in the first 1,000 words. He does 500 words that fascinate you, and then he sets a hook. There, oh, this is interesting. Oh my God, this is going on. Now I have to know what happens. And that's his technique of doing it. He's very good at that. His most successful novel spent 700 words describing peeling an onion and why it was similar to being an assassin.
Mm-hmm.
These are really skillfully done, and the better at it that someone is, the more likely they are to be successful writers because they know how to continue to drag people forward. Dan Brown is not necessarily the world's best stylist, but boy, can he create a cliffhanger. You want to know what happens in the next chapter. So you end up reading to the end of the chapter and saying, oh my God, I must see what happens next.
Narrative hook can be at the end of a chapter in a book.
But only the first chapter. If you have gone on to chapter 2 without setting your hook, you need to go back and rewrite that.
But you can hook them at the end of every chapter that they have to read the next one. But if you end too many chapters with negatives or awkward unknowns, the reader will stop reading. There's got to be it. And the plot will continue with this really interesting thing. Not this Pauline is on the rail tracks with her arms tied. Charles and Pauline doesn't work as a novel anymore. It was good in 1920 as a movie.
We've matured as storytellers. We stand on the shoulders of giants, and we stand on each other's shoulders, as a matter of fact. If you read somebody's novel and you say, I could do that better, I can do that too. Well, you're probably right. You're probably right. You are seeing something that other people, and including the writer you just read, isn't seeing. So you'll do it better and you'll do it differently. And then somebody will say, oh, I can do it better than they did. So novels and storytelling has matured, has changed. Attention spans have grown a lot shorter. If you read a Victorian novel, they are very long. They have a great deal of description. They are still compelling. They are still good stories. But we like a faster narrative. Yeah, Bill is bored by those.
I can't read them
I have
anymore.
I hate them. My wife loves them. Yeah.
I have a much greater tolerance for British mystery TV shows than he does.
You have to understand, the Americans like a happy ending. The Canadians like a sad ending.
Yeah.
And the British don't use an ending. And half their TV shows barely have a plot element at the end that tells you what's going on. That just, and now life goes on. Huh? I watched 4 hours of what?
After like the third or fourth Canadian movie with the horrible ending that made me sad, I now will not watch a movie until I verify that it is not Canadian.
The Americans have the puppy live happily ever after, the Canadians kill the puppy, and the British have the puppy run away in the last chapter. So you don't know what happens to it.
Yeah. But you do care about the character. You must care about the character. You have to become invested in their journey. Because you need to know what it is that they're looking for. As the writer, you will always know more than your reader. And a really brilliant writer, which you are all, of course, knows to set the system up, the narrative up, so that the reader figures out where you're going just moments before you reveal it. If you can do that, people will love that, especially if you're writing any kind of mystery.
All right,
They'll solve the problem, and then they'll say, but it had to be Smith, and in 4 more lines you say, and by the way, it was Smith. And they feel really smart.
particularly when you write in genres like science fiction or fantasy and you have any mystery elements, they have to be a fair mystery. They have to have enough information that if someone really analyzed it, and you can put things in that will confuse this, just do that. And you have noise, red herrings. But you have to have a fair mystery in it. Did a mystery lately, and the most likely villain who kept interfering with everything else wasn't the villain, of course. It was the person who had done some things that if you go back, oh yeah, he did that. And it was a cozy, like a murder she wrote kind of thing. But everyone in the town doesn't die every week, which is, did you ever think about the town in Murder, She Wrote?
Cabot Cove.
Cabot Cove.
I mean, do a count.
Highest murder rate.
Highest murder rate in the world. Why would anyone live in Cabot Cove?
You think it's bad to live in Rwanda, you should try Cabot Cove.
So I wondered, like, between a short story and a novel. So when I wrote my short story, I was just enthralled with the fact that I didn't need to go in depth and I could tell the whole story without, the you know. So can a novel be more short story like and just longer? You know where I
Yes.
mean, you're not going as in depth. You know, like you s-
Absolutely, absolutely,
so that-
especially if you're writing humor, for example. If you have drawn your world well enough, you don't have to go deep on it.
right.
Because if you are giving the reader everything they need to know, it doesn't have to be, and this goes back 800 years when so-and-so, painted a word on the wall and everyone has done that since. You don't have to give that as long as your story is compelling and interesting to your reader, and that you will keep everything moving. The
What-
moment that you get bogged down, our friend Lynn Abbey was writing a novel, and she said, "Okay, well, I'm feeling a little blue, so I'm only going to write the interesting bits. Then I'll go back and write the boring bits later." And then when she was finished, she said, "I didn't need to write them. In fact, there should be no boring bits in the
Right.
book."
That's a good.
If you are using background and description to entice the reader to continue in your series, you're doing it wrong. No matter how fascinating your world is, it's the story you tell in it that the reader is going to come back for. I've read many a fascinating world that were not well written in, or I didn't care about the character. Those books have never been published. Either a short story or a thing. You put in the background you need for the story, and the world will emerge, and the characters will carry them on to the next story. Do you buy a book to read about a world, but not about the characters you just read about in the same series? No. So remember what the reader's writing about, and don't be Dave Weber till you're successful. Dave loves his world. Dave tells you much about it, but he's so good at the battles and characters. You forgive him and keep reading.
Yeah.
If you want a 60-page battle at sea, Dave's your man.
Yeah.
But if you want a 24-page explanation of how steam power was introduced on the continent, Dave's your man in the same book.
The same one, yeah.
Now, the other thing about science fiction and fantasy, which I presume you're interested in because you're at a games con, the science fiction or fantasy element is vital to the structure of your story. If it is merely in the setting and has nothing to do with how the plot concludes, it's not a fantasy or science fiction story. If it could be set anywhere else, then it's not a science fiction or fantasy story. That element has to be included in the way that the story is created. It needs to pertain to how the story concludes. If you have a MacGuffin device, that has to be involved in the conclusion of the story. Otherwise, it's just window dressing. It's the setting.
And you don't need to have it.
Right. I taught at Columbia College one year, the fantasy writing workshop. And I had a guy give me a story that was set on a space station. And he was an agent. He tortured people and he went crazy. He was seeing ghosts from his past. And everyone kept saying, "Oh, this is a great science fiction story." It wasn't a science fiction story at all. There was no science fiction element. It was a ghost story.
Right.
Because that was the fantasy element was the actual thing, and it drove him mad. I thought it was very well done, but it wasn't a science fiction story at all.
Right.
Whereas if you have something in which somebody has a ray gun, but it's in a world full of elves, it's not a fantasy. It's a science fiction story. The difference is in science fiction, the science has to work, even if it doesn't work exactly like our world here and now, because we allow things that we call conventions. Mean to say faster than light travel, transporters.
Firing a
Ansibles.
weapon at thousands of kilometers,
Right.
which in space, when two things are moving a measurable fraction of the speed of light, which would be the equivalent of hitting a BB at 100 yards with a shotgun.
Right.
Not going to work
And
off.
you're not going to go into a spin afterwards. Physics needs to work, and everything has to be consistent. I mentioned continuity. This is a place where continuity is vital, because there's a physics of magic as much as there is a physics of science. There has to be an explanation for what a spell costs. It's everything from here's your D&D book where you have to have a feather and a drop of blood and you have to chant this to make the spell work. It has to be that way every time. To other people's worlds where everyone can do magic. You don't have to have anything special. It just is part of your world building. But that's not what the story is about. The story is about something else. If magic is too easy, if science is too easy, that's not where your story is coming from. And you have to keep that in mind throughout. And usually the protagonist is the character that brings about the end of the story. So they probably need to be the one using the ray gun or the magical spell or the wand or whatever it is at the end. So that all of these things need to converge to conclude your story. So keep that in mind when you're structuring it. And it can build up over time with a novel, with a short story. Try and surprise the reader. It doesn't necessarily have to be, we know, the magic ray gun is over here, the character's over here. Sooner or later they have to converge. Don't make it so obvious. You have better imaginations than that. So
Let me ask a question. So if you took a book like Andy Weir's The Martian, it's my favorite science fiction book ever. But now what you're saying has me thinking, is it really a science fiction book? Because if he was just on an island and had a bunch of things kind of coming at him, like, do you know what I'm saying? Like, I guess I'm asking.
No,
Because of the environment and because of the way he was saved and the technology necessary,
Right.
it's a science fiction book.
Mhm.
the science is vital.
The
to what he
science
was
is
doing.
vital to
Absolutely.
the end of the book.
Now,
Absolutely.
because we are used to science, it doesn't seem as if it is. We're used to stories set in space.
Right.
It might not seem so. Have you read Project Hail Mary yet?
Yeah. Oh
Okay.
yeah.
How much-
Day one, anything he buys, anything he sells, I buy.
How much science he piles into things, but you need to know
Absolutely.
it to conclude it.
Right.
And the way that the science works impacts how successful or unsuccessful he is going to be.
Right.
But all along, you get this fabulous character building.
Mhm.
No spoilers.
Mhm.
And 4 successive endings. He's really good.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, everything he did in The Martian had to be science. It could not be set just someplace. You could write somebody is cast away on a desert island
Right.
and manages to send up a smoke signal. It's how he sent up that smoke signal.
Right.
Could not be accomplished elsewhere.
Now, all the science doesn't have to be perfect. Potatoes are a terrible choice. Soybeans was much better for
But he
nutrition.
didn't have any.
But they had potatoes.
Because of Thanksgiving, the whole
Correct.
the whole thing, yeah.
It was there. It was like the smoking gun. It was like Chekhov's gun on the mantelpiece. The potatoes were there.
Right.
And that was a great choice. Health-wise, soybeans would have been better. He didn't have soybeans. And he probably had some very interesting dietary problems later on.
I can say if you
6
live
months
on
after
just
the Martian, you
potatoes
don't
and
wanna be
water,
there.
you've got scurvy and your
Yeah.
teeth fall out.
No, there's a lot of vitamin C in potatoes. That's
Yeah,
the funny thing.
There's all sorts of
It was
deficiencies.
chilling
There's
when,
no bees.
well, literally, when the habitat broke open and everything froze, and it's, oh my God, is he going to make it? Those are great cliffhangers. That is going to the edge, and that works perfectly for suspense, which is another thing that you have to keep in mind when you are writing short stories. Wasn't that a great segue? You are going to have to raise your tension constantly to keep the story moving. What are the obstacles? As they defeat a certain obstacle, the next one comes along. The result of your character having succeeded at overcoming one obstacle means that they are going to run into something that cleared obstacle allowed to happen, and so on. The complexity of it, whatever you can handle, your reader will appreciate you having built from your world building a ladder that your character needs to scale.
And speaking of things like The Martian, notice elements weren't introduced to it that didn't relate to some solution or some event. If you put them in your story or your novel and they don't relate, they shouldn't be there. The editor will notice them as surplus. And that's one of the most common mistakes, is to create. You may have the most fascinating character off on the side, but if they're not part of the plot, it's not relevant to that novel all the words put in on them are wasted and waste the reader's time, and the readers will stop enjoying them.
Now, what's great is, let's talk about Project Hail Mary briefly, is all of the things that you think don't relate to Ryland Grace become important. They are all important to him as a character. And I thought that was very, very fine storytelling. If you just throw in, oh, he likes to whistle and it's annoying, that does nothing, but all of the little things that help to show why this character acts like this. Very important to if it's important to the plot, it will become important later. Or it will become important, say, becomes evident in chapter 11, becomes important in chapter 16, but something has been introduced in chapter 15 that will become important a little while later, until you have a wonderful picture. The complexity builds. You don't have that time. You have to tell a lot more about your main character sooner in a short story, because you're going to, who keeps texting me? You need to reveal it at the right time, but your time frame is shorter.
Because you can't introduce as many elements anyhow.
Do you
Now-
ever go backwards? Do you ever get to the end and you go, gosh, I didn't set that up very well?
Oh, yeah.
No, absolutely, every time.
Okay.
Every time. I did a military SF last year, and called Never Again, and it's powered armored suits. Very standard stuff in some ways, and fun to write. And I had to go back and change the suits in all the first chapters halfway through. And there's sort of a rule of thumb that you redo your first chapter 6 to 20 times. In fact, I once convinced an author in Ireland to start using a computer when I showed her that you didn't have to type the whole first chapter over if you changed something.
Let alone the first page.
And she was very dubious. We left for 2 weeks, left her a computer with her book started on it. When we came back, she wouldn't return the computer.
Oh, my.
We lost
She
Linda
used to
Morgan.
take years to write a novel, and she upped her productivity because she didn't have to retype everything constantly.
Well done.
And Morgan Llewellyn, actually. The going back is important. Sometimes it's just a line. Sometimes it's a whole paragraph. Sometimes it's a chapter. I've dropped whole chapters in, and a couple of times I've had to go back and go through the whole book and add a character so that I could kill them towards the end and the reader would care.
Okay.
Because I got to the final scene and I needed something to make it serious.
One of the things that David Gerald puts in is he goes back and adds sense words, because he was talking about that. New writers don't put in enough description. They just don't.
I just was working with a new writer as a co-author, and every chapter that I sent back to him had at least 4 entries that said 5 senses. You're not using some of the senses at all. Everybody does good visual. Smell, touch, feel, taste. No. If you're in a combat, for example, you can taste and smell cordite, etc., or gun cotton or whatever. And all of these senses should come into play, even in a short story. In fact, more in a short story, because they will give it a much greater impact. And the other thing that new writers are often, and old writers who've gotten lazy, which I'm working with one now that I yelled at a lot, and he's getting back again, was you engage the reader by showing that the character has emotions. Don't say the emotions are shown by the actions. Show the character's emotions, and it will come through. You'll care more about that character. It's the difference between a James Bond movie and a James Bond book. In the books, Bond has emotions and reactions and gets angry and is sorry when the girl's killed. In the movie, he's just cool to watch. You don't see any emotions on most of the Bonds until the last one, the last series, because they got a character who's a British emotional actor.
Right.
But the point is, the difference between them, and you want to be the one that shows the emotions, especially in a short story, because it will introduce your character much more strongly, and more importantly, allow the reader to identify with it.
Well,
That doesn't
because-
mean add a scene to show emotions. That means take the scenes you have and show emotions.
A book is not a movie is not a book. They're two very different things. A short story makes a better movie than a novel does because you can get more of the plot into it. You just don't have enough room for an entire novel in a movie. It's a mini series or a whole series.
You realize that Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep?
Right,
Blade Runner is 22 pages long,
right, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
and 2 good movies came out of it.
Well, even like the first volume of Foundation, they made an entire TV series out of that and were very additive to it, but it was based on a book this thick, right? Like
No, it's
But then-
76,000 words, which is standard when Isaac
the
wrote it.
first novel, the first Foundation was?
No, it's bigger than that. They're pretty big books.
The Foundation books, when he finished them as books, you may be referring to the novella that appeared in Analog
Maybe that's
Magazine,
what I'm referring to, yeah.
which is when he introduced it.
Right.
But when he put it out as a book, it was like 96,000 or something, which for the time was a full-length major book. All the Foundations are books about that thick. They're standard books, 80 to 90,000 words for the day. Foundation and Empire,
Yeah.
Second Foundation, they're all standard sized books. But he did write the original Foundation as a novella, which may be what you read.
That's probably.
And that was only 31,000 words, and it was missing a lot of elements that he later put in.
Right.
And yeah, I saw the series too, and I'm embarrassed.
I like pieces of it.
Yeah, the pieces they stole from Isaac, or paid Isaac for, but the crap with the emperor and the 3 emperors and everything was not anywhere in the book, and
No.
it wasn't relevant. And Harry Seldon was completely misportrayed, but that's another discussion, not this one. But the point is that Isaac was very good at showing the emotions of his characters. Whether it was Dr. Earth or Harry Seldon or anyone, his characters cared and you knew it. And when somebody cares, you care with them. When somebody's angry or when somebody's frightened, you can be frightened with them.
The Ugly Little Boy,
Yes.
an incredibly impactful story and very unexpected, beautifully done. Very science fiction, could not have been
As a
anything
monster.
else.
Mhm.
If you haven't read it, you should.
I have not, yeah.
The first short story that I read that I knew was science fiction was Nightfall, also Asimov.
No, so
No, it's,
Nightfall's process.
I'm pretty sure it's
Well, Nightfall's Asimov, yeah.
Yeah.
With the first time they see the star, yeah.
right.
I'm thinking Night.
These were shorts. This was a short story that, for me, it changed my view of the universe because it put me on a different planet where I knew I was on a different planet, and I thought that was spectacular. When you can change your reader's perception, and they grow from that. I grow from writing it. They grow from reading it. And sometimes we interact, and that's cool.
Let me introduce another concept for you that might help you with your writing. Writing is communications, and how you communicate sections can change things. Your choice of words, your choice of the letters and the sounds of words, the length of your sentences can affect how your story reads. A scene that is gentle and romantic and happy should have soft words and longer sentences. If you're doing a battle scene, if you're doing a combat, a good rule of thumb is start with regular sentences and get shorter as you go, because as a reader's eye skips, their pulse will actually accelerate. They'll get a little adrenaline. And if you use hard sounds, ka isn't kick, pa, ta, hard sounds, tough, zing, bang. We don't have any whoosh, oof sounds for our battle. We have bang and hit and rap and zap, all that. If you use if you want to sell a fight scene, first of all, nobody dialogues any length in a real fight scene. Have it before they fight. but don't do it during the fight. A normal firefight's about 17 seconds. And have shorter and shorter and shorter scenes.
Until you're down to short declarative phrases.
I fired from the hip, and then he died. Bang, that was it.
And by the way, action then reaction, or not. I leaped up as he swept his sword under my feet. No, wrong order. In a firefight, all you can think of is focus. So he swept his sword, I leaped over it. So action, reaction, short declarative phrases.
And when you're writing something that you want to lighten the mood, put happy sounding words, people that are happy, words that have associations that are good with them. Use the words as another level of communication in your short story, especially. Use the way you write those, what words you choose, and how you write them can affect the reader's response to them. The words themselves, not even the concept.
And don't cheat your reader out of those experiences, especially if you're writing a novel. You have the room to put in the fight scene and the aftermath. And the reactions to it, and whether or not the character thinks that they're justified having participated in these actions. You have the room for these things. They are rewards to your reader for having participated in reading your book.
I call them the payoff scenes.
Mhm.
I've read the whole book, so I can either see him get laid or killed. Kill him or lay him on camera. I just turned down an author for Bane and an outline. Walter's not going to make it because he's so fascinated with his characters and the setups and the interactions that he gives me half-page fight scenes after 12-page setups. Yep. His battle consists of they did this, and it resulted in this. Now here's how the people reacted. Now he's writing about the people, and he loves writing about the people, but he robs the reader of the fun of seeing how this alternate world battle was fought with the different weapons. And that's part of why they're reading the book. Mm-hmm. So make sure your reader gets the payoff of whatever you're trying to set your story up. Don't deny yourself those words at the end to keep the story short. They're needed to make it more satisfying ending. Whether it's a more fun combat, a more deep emotional change, a reflection, or the irony of the next thing they do, which you think if you're going to put in or not, but it shows how they really are changed.
Want to ask some questions?
Yeah, we're running out of time.
We're getting there.
Maybe just about the general. So I'm old. I grew up without television, and I read books every day.
Good.
Met multiple books. And I find myself now, as I want to read a book, I'm going back and back further in time. And the last, things that are published in the last 10 years, I have. So first off, there's a lot of poorly written books. I have a hard time reading first person, which is so prolific. But anyway, so, I'm kind of worried. Is there still value in that base, that old school, real writing?
Oh, very much. It's
Things
not old school. It's typical.
Yeah.
Right. Some things have changed in style. You can't do as much description. You can't put as much reliance on a unique universe in science fiction to sell it. And it's now trendy to have villains that are multi-leveled. And that's good. It makes for a better. If you know why, and in a book they tell you the Bond villain's so nasty, they're nastier because they feel every villain's the hero in their own mind. They're doing the right thing for them. Anyone who says I'm doing it because I'm evil isn't real.
Right.
Putin and Hitler didn't think they were evil. They were saviors of their countries. So those are changes that are good, but you don't need to change. You need to tell a story. And a good storytelling hasn't changed in the 50 years I've been editing.
Right.
I still can go back and read. Now, what does change is the reader's assumptions and expectations. Today's readers have read a lot more science fiction than anybody in the 60s or 50s or 70s even, because there wasn't that much of it out there. When I was getting into the business in the 70s, there were maybe 25 science fiction books. There were maybe 15 science fiction books a month coming out from the publishers.
On the other hand, there were thousands of short stories.
Yes, and it was all short stories, which is why the Hugo Awards is one novel and tons of short story things, because that's when it was created. When we did the Dragon Awards, which I help run, they're all novels, because that's what everybody reads now. And the short stories are only about 20%. So we went with it. Also, we didn't want to conflict with the Hugos. But the point is that you can't make a reader excited just because Half Spacesuit Will Travel or Farmer in the Sky. The plots of some of the Heinlein juveniles were keyed on the unique elements in them. And some of those unique elements just aren't unique anymore. They aren't interesting to read about.
Right.
There's nothing being told in them really. Some, Trap from the Moon is, because it's romance is screwed up, and Zero Gravity just makes sex harder. That's what, or Low Gravity makes sex harder. That's what it's all about. And you can do great dancing.
The same is said. This could be said of fantasy. There's been a million books with dragons and elves, and so,
Oh yeah, it's all changed
So
since
it
Dragon and the George was written, and it was amazing. A sentient dragon, and now they all are.
Yeah.
Is there ever a point where you as an editor, you get turned off by it? You're just like, okay, that's just super derivative and I'm done and just toss it?
Oh yeah, we had at one point when HIV first came out, there was actually a sign at the ACE office on the back of the door. You didn't see it going in, you saw it going out, saying, all stories about vampires who bite someone who's HIV positive are rejected. Because everybody sent one in at the same way. There must have been 300 of them between the publishers, and no magazine wanted it. No, everybody thought, "Whoa, that's cool. What if a vampire bit them?" And they were writing, and maybe 2 of them were worth reading, and they didn't get published anyhow just because of the dross.
More recently, everybody had a COVID story.
Right.
I was talking to a friend of mine who was in Hollywood, and I said, I predict within 18 months there will be a rash of COVID stories or pandemic stories, and he was silent. And I said, "You're writing one, aren't you?" And he said, yep, he was.
Yeah. So yeah, the best advice I can do is find the story inside you, not in what you're seeing on the shelf. Because by the time it takes 18 months for a legacy publisher to put a book out, by the time your book's out, the trend's over.
Yeah. Right.
I mean, if you'd written steampunk 2 years ago, it might be just coming out now and it will thunk because steampunk stopped selling. And I expect in 5 years, if you're writing RPG lit, it'll thunk because it may have some more legs because of the size, but eventually that market will fade. Just as the market for, say, Star Trek and Star Wars books is not what it used to be.
The trouble is that when there is so much of it, there's a glut. Everyone says, "Okay, well, I've had enough now. I don't need that." And people say, "But I'm still writing the one that I want to put out, and it will be different." It's not. That's the trouble, for example, with Lit RPG, is they all have the same structure. One of my students submitted a Lit RPG, and I said, "Here's the problem. To be a success in any kind of writing, you have to be first, best, or different. You can't be first because everybody else has come before you, all the thousands that are out there already. Arguable whether or not people are going to think that you're best. Your only option is different. How can you make a Lit RPG book different enough that the readers of those books still likes yours even though you deviate from the norm? Can you lead people in a different way? Can you set the new trend? Because if you're following a trend, you're just one of the same. You're no longer first, and you probably aren't best."
40 years ago, all romance novels had the same plot. Barbara Cartland used to comment, all she had to do was use all search and change names and locations. But sales. People will read Lit RPG because it's comfortable. and it's fun. And there's some unique elements in each Italian story. Everyone has a sarcastic main character, a cynical friend. There's a whole lot of standardization in it. What happened to romance was they discovered that to get new readers, for new writers to get noticed, they had to introduce new elements. In the case of romance, time travel and fantasy crossovers. And suddenly the biggest sellers had someone going back in time and being kept by a pirate, or someone, there were still bosom blasters where you can tear the shirts, but now they're
No, my friend made a pretty good living writing time travel romances.
and she did those. And Susan was one of the ones who introduced that. She's gone now. And I always credit her for that. Well, Lit RPG is going to have to take a twist if it's going to stay relevant. Because eventually the formulaic will get down and down and down. And they'll still be there. People still buy Star Wars and Star Trek novels. Except now because there's new product out there, they're trying to do, Picards and Strange New Worlds. I want Strange New Worlds. Those are the best. It's so much like the original. And I'm not seeing any books yet. It's really annoying. Anyhow, so what you've got to look at is different, is a twist that will take something that's there and catch the people who would read that if there was something new, and they'll read it. And that can work very well. And it worked on classic fantasy. A good example of that was changing the style of the heroes. Nine Princes in Amber was very different from all the epic fantasies being written over that period, all Tolkien style. And suddenly Roger, which almost by accident did Nine Princes in Amber, it shouldn't have been, wasn't going to be published, and it happened. And heroes who are introspective, doing strange things that interacted with our universe but aren't our universe. And suddenly went, I've got a fantasy novel that isn't about elves. Or there's no dwarves in it, but it's a fantasy novel. And it worked out. Roger wrote Nine Princes, Roger was a teacher. He had the summer off. He said, I'm just going to write what I want this summer. I don't have to worry about it. He wrote 220,000 words that summer. And then went, if I wrote that much, it can't be any good, and he put it in a drawer. Well, a year, the book he'd written before that won the Hugo Award. And
Lord of Light
won the Hugo Award. And Lester Del Rey is going, do you have anything else? Do you have anything else? Because that was when the Hugo was a real big award. Right. And it sold books. You put Hugo winner, and you bought everything that I did because it was real quality in those days. He said, well, I've got this thing in the drawer that I wrote a long time ago. And he said, well, send it to me. Send it to me. I want to look at it. Well, he said, you're right. It's too long. You've got to break these two parts up, and I need you to expand this last 50,000 words into it. And we've got two 80,000 word novels and make this one into a full novel. And the first one was Nine Princes in Amber. And it won a Hugo too. 2 years later, it came out and it was a Hugo winner, and went 9 volumes. So the point is that do it a little different, that feeds into some genre, and especially in novels more than short stories, but a short story too. If you can introduce an ending nobody expects, you'll get noticed. Submit to contests. Submit to publishers' contests. Submit to Writers of the Future.
Send stories to the contest. The prizes are really amazing. We're about to have our grand gala. All 12 winners, 3 from each quarter, are flown into Hollywood from wherever they are. Last year we had a winner from Malaysia. And she wrote the most wonderful, funny science fiction story. They sit for a week-long seminar that is taught by me and Tim Powers, and people like Larry Niven and Nettie Okafor and Rob Sawyer come and talk to them, Kevin Anderson and Rebecca Massa, Steve Sterling, S.M. Sterling, Tom McCaffrey. Yeah, I already mentioned me. And they are put up in a hotel. They have an honest-to-God black tie, red carpet gala where they are interviewed by press, have their pictures taken. They are given awards and money, because you get money for the prize, money for the word count because your short story is going into a book, a trophy, and then you get to have your first book signing. And somebody has illustrated your story, your short story, in this massive anthology. So it's a huge deal. It is the biggest deal anyone will ever make about a short story. But you can't win if you don't enter.
The winner gets $5,000.
The winner, oh no, that's of the 12 winners, first prize gets $1,000, second prize gets $750, third prize gets $500. But of all the 4 first place winners, one of them becomes the grand prize winner and gets an additional $5,000.
So this is the new
Writers of the future.
Writers of the future.
Writers and illustrators.
by
of the future.
Vane?
No,
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 it's
it's
separate.
from,
Okay,
it's our own thing.
all right.
It is.
No,
it is
but the
separate.
point is, submit to places people will see you if you're not trying to make a living at it,
Yeah,
so that you can get noticed in your short story.
Now, if you have not been published before, the Writers of the Future will take anyone who has not yet published 3 short stories or a
For a
novel. So there's a lot of room.
I published history many
Then you
decades ago.
Then you're still eligible.
Yeah, it's only science fiction.
Science fiction and fantasy, speculative fiction.
I accidentally wrote a history book and then 20 years later I decided I want to be a writer again.
Well, Oakley wrote a book instead.
It
Yeah.
really happened that way. I said to my wife one day, I said, I have a book sitting there under the computer. She said,
Well, okay.
we'll put it
Put it
together.
out.
You're eligible for many short story contests. Enter the ones that are free.
No one will hold this history book
Yeah.
against you.
Yeah.
Don't pay to
Right,
have anybody look over your book
right.
unless you are
right.
actually paying them to edit it.
We'll have to talk. You know those how to lose a war, how to lose a battle, etc.
Mhm.
I'm that Bill Fawcett.
Okay.
How many are there now? 17?
No, 9 of those and 3 of the 100 mistakes that changed history, 100 mistakes that
Right.
and stumbles in history. That's me too.
Stumbles in the
And presidential peculiarities.
Oval
stuff
Office
like that.
oddities.
I'm a hack. I'm a hack history writer. Anyhow,
More questions? Anything?
we're running out of time, and we're not in a hurry. So,
Actually, there's nobody in here after us.
so if you have more questions or if you want to talk about your own story, let's do it.
So, I mean, I had, I'm going to enter the Vane short story.
Good.
I intend to be one of the finalists. I'm not messing around. So anyway, one of the weird. So my wife doesn't like to be considered a co-writer, but we're very much a team, and we have completely different skill sets, and it kind of is. I mean, to my mind, is kind of a magical thing as we're working.
Good.
And but it's I feel like I have a big advantage in that. But I read when I consider, because we quit our careers and sold our home to do this. So I mean, it was serious.
Where are you living now?
We travel full time in an RV.
Oh, van life. Okay.
So
Good luck.
except for grandkids are dragging us back. But we had this discussion about the reading process, and she said to me, well, I said about visualizing, seeing, experiencing a book. She says, I don't.
Mhm.
And I said, I don't understand what you mean. She says, I only see words. And I didn't believe her. And then I had to look at the whole neurology of readers and realize that there are a segment of readers that only see words. And it is the interplay of words and the structure of words and sentences that are their pleasure in reading. I'm just so thankful that's not me, but now I'm so thankful it is her. But so it's been a wonderful process. Have you co-written, done anything like that?
Not with each other.
No, with each other.
No, we want to stay married.
Yeah, okay. You don't do that at
We
all?
have published one short story together, but I have collaborated with a lot of people. Bill has collaborated with a lot of people.
But no, first of all, our styles are different. Second of all, she's a lot more talented than I am, and it's embarrassing. Also, I will edit hers and make suggestions. I look over every story she writes and make suggestions. But there isn't that much to do on them because she's a better writer than I am anyhow. I can just see the obvious sometimes, etc. And as an editor, I simply leave what I've written back of 6 months, and then I edit my own book. So we write very, very differently in both procedure and result.
He's a
Right.
wonderful editor. He really, really, my friend who is the best, well, she's gone, like I said, best-selling fantasy romance writer, thought that Bill was the best editor she ever worked with. Because he sees the things that are obvious to him as an expert reader that are not necessarily obvious to the person who wrote it.
I'm good at getting outside of the
Yes.
writer's head and simply seeing that I'm a systems person. I was trained to be a systems person. In education, believe it or not, but a systems person. And as such, I look at the system of the story when I edit it. I look at what the words are doing. I'm like her in many ways, even though I do picture the worlds and stuff. But I also, when I'm working as an
You're seeing
editor,
this-
I'm seeing the words. I'm
you're
not seeing the story.
Right.
And that makes me a good editor in many ways. And I'm also only sometimes terrified when I have to call up someone that's, especially when I was beginning editor. You have no idea the trauma of having to call up Gordon Dixon or Ann McCaffrey and tell them something isn't right
So after
when you're
three,
new in the business.
after 3 books, she has inputted 4 times with major suggestions. They're the 4 best things in my book.
No question.
And that's the truth. When you talk about the different, and so I mean, I keep telling her, work harder, because she
Well,
feeds me that gold.
If you can't be humble enough to accept editing, then that's going to be a problem.
No, I love the editing. She
But I write mostly
How is he
nonfiction.
accepting editing?
Well, he doesn't mind it.
Oh,
I'm
good.
surprised. 'Cause
Nine-
if I
nine-
wrote something, I wouldn't.
90%. I only once or twice does she change the meaning of the writing. Every other time, 90%. It's a structural and improvement.
What are some of the things when you see collaborators who are successful, like James S. Corey or somebody like that? Are there consistencies that you see across there? Like what makes a good collaboration?
Basically, you don't have to get along at all.
Okay.
I'll tell you that right now.
Okay.
There was
That's good to know.
there was a
You must respect each
You have
other.
to, you have to respect the others, what they're doing, and you've got to start by having them doing what their strength is. If someone's good at this or good at that or good at first drafts, then that's what they do. If you put it the other way, just because someone else is the big name, but the other one is this, then it's probably going to be antagonistic and fall apart and not be as good a product as it could be. Another part is you have to be willing to let your collaborators say, I need this different because I'm going to do this. You can't be in love with your story or too proud of your story if you're collaborating. I have collaborated with several people, and I normally do the original concept and they do a lot of the writing, and they've changed what I give them. And if I can't accept that, I can't collaborate because that's what I'm asking them to do. So you have to understand what you've asked the other person to do that you're collaborating with. And you can be Niven and Purnell and practically holding duels with pistols, which they did for a few years before they got back together again. And it's still come out with a sequel to Molten God's Eye that was a wonderful book, which they weren't even speaking at the time, that Stephen Barnes got involved to moderate.
Okay.
He's a martial artist.
He is, thank goodness, one of the most zen people you will ever know.
He has advanced degrees in at least 3 martial arts, and he is amazingly centered for all of that. Nice guy. Writes good action.
As a collaborator, I have collaborated with Ann McCaffrey, Robert Asprin, John Ringo, Travis Taylor, who is an actual rocket scientist. The only real failed collaborations that I've had were with the romance writer friend, because she wanted to write a book with every single one of her writing friends. But it wasn't going to work because we were too different, and I would rather have the friendship anytime than a book.
Right.
And one where it seemed like it was.
Come in.
No,
Somewhere else.
okay.
Exactly.
It seemed like it was going to work out, and then the seemingly happy collaborator turned into a control freak.
Oh, yeah, he got strange. Come in. If you got a panel,
There's one coming up.
Okay.
we gotta go
This is
then.
more about coming up.
Okay.
Well, thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you
for
for
sharing. I really enjoyed the two of you last year.
We'll look forward to seeing,
Layered another layer on there.
Okay, good.
we'll look forward to seeing what you write.
Yes.
They'll be back.
Drive safely.
It's such a pleasurable.
Send it to our
writing is such a
contest.
pleasurable thing.
By the way, I work with the Bain contest.
Okay, good. You'll see what I submit.
Good. Okay, well, we'll turn the room over to the next one.
I walked, thank you very much for your time.
Oh, thank you, thank you for
Thank you for coming.
I walked all over the
No, I
conference
didn't.
hall looking for this.
Yeah, they gave us the wrong
I don't
room.
know how many people probably aren't here because of that.
We were
Yeah.
aggravated too. They told us it was in 4324, which doesn't exist.
Yeah, we got here late, so
It
sorry.
just says Grand Suite on it. I'm like, what is the Grand Suite? Finally, I went to the desk after I walked around. I actually gave up. And then I went to the HQ because I'm a volunteer and they're like, why aren't you in that thing? I was like, because I couldn't
We
find it.
didn't know what it was.
We have another one today at 6.
That's six.
What is it?
It's.
We have one
Oh.
publishing.
Mhm.
Feel free to come whether you're signed up or not.
Is
Any
it
of our-
also here?
I believe it is.
No, it's not.
Where is it?
Oh, maybe over on the second floor above
It seems to
HQ.
be bottom. Oh, wait, no, I lost this. Dalewood C, which is.
Yeah,
On the
that's
second floor.
It's right above the
Yeah,
HQ.
fortunately it's here.
But any of the, since you didn't make this one, any of the ones you see us scheduled for,
Okay.
which is world building, and what's the other?
I signed up.
And what's the other one?
That one was today.
Publishing today, and then world building,
No,
and then
I think we're at Bring the World of Life, the world building.
and then Sunday we have one
Yes, being the
at meeting at 9.
So if you have
Okay.
questions, ask us
Thank you.
anything.
I'll hold on to this.
Okay, yeah, by all means. Thank you.
Yeah.
You don't want to double dip. Why don't I go down and see if I can get our keys working?
Yeah.
Yeah, you go, we get elevated to our floor, go down to the floor.
Just cut it short 15 minutes. Cut it 15 minutes short. I'll let HQ know. So that's. No, I understand.
So what was the previous step?
What's that?
What was the previous event?
Well, I don't know if that happened because I couldn't find the location. I walked around the conference hall 20 minutes. I gave up. And then I went to HQ and sat down. And why aren't you at that thing? I'm like, because I couldn't find it. And then these two were frustrated because they were told a room that didn't exist. The people who were here, so I only got like the question and answer session. And a little bit of like the, superficial,
If it hadn't been for a friend of mine who knew where this was, I wouldn't have been able to find it.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a problem.
Yeah. I will mention it in the meetings, the post.
Yeah, we call it post-mortems.
Yeah.
You know,
Post-mortem, yeah,
Yeah.
I do in my IT world.
Yeah, and also improv and other things.
That is cool.
Oh, thanks. It's a couple years ago, I came out with a gavel of doom, and this
What
is
had happened
What?
was, oh, I get it.
Rob Standen is one of our players, and he's always like, okay, what had happened was, so I thought, I'm gonna make a stand just for that saying, and
And what is the other stand?
it's, well, see, in BCC, they're a judge, not a GM. you have been judged.
Oh, yeah, I like that, I like
And
that,
so-
that's a good one.
It's a, yeah,
Yes.
yeah, thanks. Glad you like it. That's sorry again.
And you made that,
Yeah, I
Cool.
have some for having around here, so we'll see.
nice, very cool.
Thanks a lot.
Take care.
Yeah, you too. Oops.
Oh, they left early and just left my camera there. That's something.
No,
I'm just-
sorry. We came in a little early. I've been here watching stuff.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
I-
Yeah, they must have wrapped early because they had a 2-hour session.
They were doing Q&A.
Okay.
And we'll get in during the break and clean.
Okay.
So,
Did they just recently leave or?
yeah. Just
Okay.
5 minutes ago.
Oh, I just missed them then.
So it was just a matter of they heard a knock at the